Hey everyone, I'm Kirsten, and today we are going to turn this unfinished barnwood wreath with interchangeable centers into this. So let's get started. Okay, so let me show you what you guys are going to need for today's project. Most importantly, you are going to need this barnwood unfinished wood wreath. Now, the greatest thing about this is there are interchangeable shapes that you put in the center. So for today's video, I picked the heart and the butterfly, but there are thousands to choose from. So when you go on unfinishedwoodcoat.com, pick whatever insert that you like best. There's some for every single holiday and every single season. And before we get started, let me show you how easy these are. So you pick your insert, you pick your wreath, and then you have a little tab in the back, if you can see that little tab, that once your project is painted, you slip your insert underneath that tab, you press down, and there you go. You've got a shape in the middle for that season. And then when you want to switch it out, you just bend that tab back just a little bit, pull your insert out, and you change it. Okay, so you're going to need your wreath. You're going to need the inserts that you pick. We're going to do the heart and the butterfly today. And then you are going to personalize it with a word. And I picked bless. So this is a laser wood piece that you'll add to the wreath. Okay, so to paint your project, I am picking FolkArt chalk paint. My all-time favorite paint, but it is great for distressing. And that's the look we're going for today. So you're going to need FolkArt chalk paint white. You're going to need black, you're going to need castle, which is this dark gray, and then two great things that we are going to use today is wax and wood tint. Wood tint is walnut, and then the wax is clear. Make sure you get clear because there's also a white wax. Okay, so brushes, I always like to use a flat brush. I always like to use a gold nylon. So just have a few different sizes around, but we're going to be mostly base coating, so a larger brush. You are going to need a stencil brush because we are going to use an amazing product today. So this is a silkscreen, and this is Martha Stewart. Pick whatever design you want, but I picked this one because I love the different elements. There's a big shape, a little shape, and some accent shapes. So you're going to need a Martha Stewart silkscreen, and with that, you're going to need a medium stencil brush. You're also going to need a Spouncer, which we're going to use to do our laser letter. And then the basics that I always want you to have is some water to clean your brushes, some paper towels, a palette, which I love a ceramic palette. And then this is nice whenever you're distressing. This is just an old dry paintbrush that we're going to use to dust off our project as we do the distressing. So that's what you're going to need to get started today. The first thing that we are going to do is we are going to use this wax. You're going to need about a medium-sized flat brush, and you're going to need your wax. And what the wax is great for is it allows you to add layers of color and then distress it that much easier. Another great tool that we are going to use today, gosh, I almost forgot, is the scraper. This tool is a quick, easy way to make chippy barnwood paint. Okay. So the clear wax and a brush, and we'll get started. Okay, so using the clear wax and a medium-sized flat brush, I like to just dip my brush right into the bottle. And what you are going to do is you are just going to add wax above and below these grooves that are created on the wreath. So it's really just a random brush stroke. You don't have to be too particular. You don't want to get wax inside that crack. So you just want to, almost like a dry brush technique, add some wax above and below each groove. You can also add a little bit of wax on the edges and just feather it in towards the center of your wood surface. Okay, so now that there's wax on every single groove around it and just really a really light stroke around the edges, what you want to do is you want to set this aside and let this dry. It dries pretty quick, so you maybe want to let it dry for a couple hours. Okay, so our next step is, here is the wreath. all the wax is dry, and you can kind of see it changes the color of the wood just a little bit. Okay, so once that step is done, now what we are going to do is we are going to base coat the entire wreath with the chalk black. So with this, because it's a bigger surface, I'm just going to pick a larger flat brush and the chalk paint black. Okay, so chalk paint black, I like to dip my brush right into the bottle, a larger flat brush, and all I am going to do is base coat my entire surface. And what you want to do is you want to paint right over that wax. Now make sure that you do not paint in your grooves, because that's a step that we're going to do later. So you are just going to base coat, cover up all of that wax. If you get a little bit in the groove, that's okay, but just don't base coat completely inside there. See how you're leaving that groove open? Make sure also that you get your edges, because you want it to look complete. Okay, so everything is black, and now you're just going to let this dry completely, which the chalk paint dries pretty quick. Okay, so I'm going to set that over there, and here is the frame, or the wreath, totally base coated black and dry. So you've got your layer of wax dry, then you've base coated it black, and that is dry. So now what we are going to do is one more layer of wax. And the reason we're adding wax again is because when I teach you in a minute this amazing scraper tool, it is going to scrape off layers and layers, and it's going to reveal everything underneath. And the wax is the key to that. It makes it that much easier. So the same technique that we did before, what you are going to do is clear wax and a brush, but this time we are going to go over the black just a little bit next to the grooves. Okay, so now using the clear wax and your flat brush, you are just going to almost like a little feather pattern, put a little bit of wax only above and below each groove. You don't want a lot. You don't want a lot in that groove, and you don't want a perfect line. So that's why you're kind of just doing a soft little feather stroke. A few little feather strokes along the edge coming in. You never want to create a pattern with the wax. You don't want a straight line. You don't want to go wiggly. You just want a really soft feathered pattern on the grooves and on the edges. Okay, so now that I have added wax over all of the black sections, I am going to let this wax dry completely, and then we'll start the next step. Now I have got a wreath that has the first layer of wax dry, the black dry, a second layer of wax. I know it's hard to see, but that's because it's dry and it's clear, so that is dry. So now what we are going to do is we are going to base coat each section of the barnwood with a different color, like you saw in our finished sample. So some will be white, some will be gray, and some will be black. So you are going to need the white chalk paint, you're going to need the black chalk paint, and then you're going to need Castle, which is the gray. And then here again, just a couple different brushes. So I'm going to use a larger flat brush because we're going to be base coating. Now we're going to base coat our stripes. Each stripe is a different color. So first I'm going to use the chalk paint Castle. And again, I always like to just dip right into the bottle. So when you're base coating each stripe, the chalk paint, it covers so wonderfully. So you'll only need one coat. So make sure, again though, we're still not painting in those little grooves. We're leaving those the natural wood for now. So I'm going to paint my first stripe gray. Look at how that coverage is one coat coverage. That's the greatest thing. And then make sure also when you're painting your stripes, match up your edge so that your stripe matches your edge. Okay, so now that you've base coated each section of your wreath, You are going to set that aside to dry. Okay, we're almost to the fun stuff, the distressing, the chippy paint look. Okay, so here is our wreath. Base coated with the black, base coated with a couple layers of the wax. Each color is dry, each section is painted and dry. And don't forget, you were never supposed to paint deep inside that crack. That is what we're going to do next. So before we do that, this amazing little tool, this is called the scraper. It's by FolkArt, which also makes these wonderful chalk paints. What you do with this is you are actually, you're going to scrape. That's why it's called the scraper. You are going to scrape your surface, lifting up the wax, the paint in between, the raw wood underneath, creating a really distressed finish. So let's get started with that. Okay, so using the FolkArt scraper, remember where you applied the wax, and you are just going to take that edge and you are just going to go back and forth, kind of in the cracks. Kind of, remember you added wax along the edge, and see how that is just removing wax to get to black, and then wax, see, to get to the raw wood. And just keep moving that scraper around. It's kind of messy, but it's so much fun because look, you're getting to the black, you're getting to the wax. Now I'm just going to finish up using the scraper along that bottom edge. A little bit on the gray, and then I'm just going to kind of give everything a little scratch. Look at how that scraper makes the most incredible distressed finish. Okay, then you got a little bit of a mess, so that's where the dry, clean paintbrush comes in. Just kind of going inside all those cracks, give everything a little sweep, just to get those chunks that came off of your project. But look at what that has done. The wax and the scraper together just reveals all of those different layers. Isn't that incredible? Okay, so now our next step, what we are going to do now is we are going to use the wood tint. So again, this is the FolkArt chalk wood tint, and this is a walnut color. And this is very thin like a stain, so we're going to use that and about a medium-sized flat brush. So what we are going to do with this, working as a stain, we are going to fill in all of these grooves that I had you not paint, all these grooves in the middle, and then also all of these areas where the paint chipped off using the scraper. So using the walnut wood tint, I am going to go right into the bottle with my brush. It's very thin like a stain. And I am going to drag my brush inside each of those grooves. And that wood tint is going to stain the paint or the wood that you left unfinished, unpainted. It's also going to pick up all of those cracks and chips that you made with the scraper in between colors. And then what I'm also going to do is, using my palette, I'm going to get a little bit of water, and I am just going to water down that stain. So see, it's just a little bit thinner consistency. And I am going to go over most of my surface, kind of blending in those edges. But you don't want to use the stain, the tint, right out of the bottle for this part, because you don't want it to be that dark. You don't want your project to be dark brown. So again, I'm just adding water to the wood tint when I'm going over the flat surfaces, working that into the cracks and all of the edges that I did. So a little bit of water on the flat surface, on the solid colors, but then right into the bottle to do those dark grooves, because you want that to look like the seam between two old pieces of barnwood. So a little bit more water, and then you're just going to kind of create like a wash over the flat part. So now I've added the wood tint on the entire surface. Now what I like to do, and this is just a tip, depending on how heavy you want the distressing, I have a damp paper towel, and what I'm going to do is just kind of lightly, in a few areas that are darker than I wanted, I'm just going to go in and blend that wood tint even more take off any areas that are a little streaky. See, you're just picking up a little bit of it. You don't want to remove it all. And again, if you want a really dark finish, don't remove any of it. But if you want a little bit softer areas, you want your base coat color to come through, wipe that just a little bit. Okay, so now you've got all of your different colors. You've got your stain, your antique. Everything is looking 100 years old. So now let this dry completely and we'll get to the next step. Okay, so voila. Here is our wreath, totally dry, distressed, chippy paint. Look at what the scraper did, all the different layers. It looks like a 100-year-old piece of barnwood. So this is something that is super exciting. This is what I mentioned to you guys earlier. This is the Martha Stewart screen. There are a bunch of different designs. They work fabulous with the Martha Stewart paint. They work on fabric and wood and glass, but I love when you use different products together, because this is one of my favorite products mixed with one of my other favorite products with another of my favorite products, and when all that comes together, it's just so much fun. So the silk screens are kind of like an advanced stencil. You kind of use them like a stencil, but I'll show you the difference. So this particular screen has several different elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut those apart so that it's easier to work with. And you just cut right through that material where the line they provided. Okay, so these I'm going to use later. I'm going to set those to the side. For our wreath, we're going to use this big element. These silk screens are like my favorite thing ever. You cannot mess them up. So there is tons of detail. There's no bridges like you would have in a stencil. And what you do is you carefully separate it from the backing paper because they're adhesive. And you just pull that right off of there. Save your backing paper because this you will use because these are reusable. So you will place, and I'm going to do it just on this gray stripe. Don't forget it's adhesive, so just push it down a little bit. And then using my white chalk paint, and this is where we're going to use that stencil brush, I am going to show you, this is so exciting. I love this. For anyone that stencils, you know you use almost no paint. You have to be really careful because everything seeps underneath. The silk screen is the total opposite. I am going to pick up a ton of paint. See all that on my brush? On a stencil brush. And make sure it's pushed down. And then you are just going to slap that paint on there almost, oh, I don't know, almost spreading it on there, maybe like peanut butter. You are going to just work that over the entire surface. You don't have to worry about it bleeding. You don't have to worry about too much paint. You want a lot of paint because you want that to move very smoothly on your surface. So you are just using that stencil brush to brush that over. And see, there's a lot of paint. See all those blobs? With a stencil, that would be a disaster. But with a silk screen, it's magic. Okay, so you've got that big old blob on there. Oh my gosh, watch this. This is the most exciting. And then while the paint is wet, you just peel that off. Ta-da! Look at the detail. It's perfect. Nothing bled, nothing dripped, all because of the silk screen. Okay, so now on the second side, I've applied all that white paint, a lot of it so it moves around, and then the reveal is what's so exciting. And then you just pull that silk screen off, and you get the amazing detail with the silk screen. Now, a key to the silk screen is immediately stick it in some water. This is just a little Tupperware. Get it in there and get it wet because there's so many little areas. You don't want that to dry on the screen. Once you clean it with soap and water, put it back on the backing paper and you can reuse it again and again. Okay, so I'm gonna let that dry completely and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so here is our wreath. Everything is done. There's our silk screen with all that great detail. Just because I like everything old and distressed, I'm going to sand it just a little bit. All I'm going to do is go over some of the areas on this silk screen to just give it a little bit of a distressed look. I don't want to take off any of the detail, just enough to just kind of chip it up a little bit. Maybe a little bit on the edges, but not much. We let the scraper and the wax do all the heavy distressing, so the sandpaper is just kind of a final touch. Okay, so now that I'm done sanding, always make sure to sand your edges. What we are going to do for our final step to make this distressed is we are going to need our scraper, our white chalk paint, an old toothbrush, which you always have to have on handy, and the wood tint that you used before to fill in the cracks. Here is your scraper tool that you used. Another great technique for this is I'm going to take the chalk paint right out of the bottle, and I am just going to load, not too thick but not too thin, the end of the scraper. And then what I'm going to do, very light-handed, don't apply a lot of pressure, is I'm going to start always on the edge and just drag that across your barnwood stripes. Keep reloading it whenever you need more paint. You usually get 1 or 2 swipes. Don't go all the way up, but just the edge with a good amount of paint, but you don't want it dripping off of there. So I loaded it with the white. Again, you're just going to start on the edge and very softly skim across that barnwood piece. It's creating another layer of chippy old distressed paint. So reload the end of your scraper, and then again, you're just going to put it on the edge and just lightly drag it across, just along the edges, creating another layer of chippy distressed paint. Not a lot of pressure, just a thin swipe across the surface. Okay, so now I have finished adding that layer of white all over the wreath. Okay, so do the splatter. You're going to need an old toothbrush, your walnut wood tint, and a little bit of water. So on my palette, I'm going to dip first into some water and then a little bit into the walnut. Stir that up so it's really, really thin. And then all I am going to do is, using my finger, is I'm going to rake that over, getting a little splatter that just, again, adds another layer of old barnwood finish to your surface. So again, then what you would do after you splatter everything is let that dry completely. Okay, so now that your barnwood wreath is totally complete, tons of layers of distressing and looks so wonderful, let's do the embellishment on top. So what you're going to need is you're going to need your laser blessed, you are going to need the white chalk paint, and a Spouncer. Whatever Spouncer you like, but this is the one that I like to use. So I'm going to use the white and the Spouncer, and a little tip is shake the paint just a little bit to get some paint on that lid on the inside, and then when you take off the lid, you've got a perfect little palette loaded with paint. So when using a Spouncer, just dip in that paint. You don't want too much, but you don't want to take it all off either. And then just start spouncing on your laser letter. Now make sure when you're working on these laser pieces by Unfinished Wood Co. that you work on a flat surface. You don't want to be holding it up, spouncing it, because they're so beautiful because they are very fragile. You don't want to snap it in half. The reason I also like to use this Spouncer is because no paint drips down in all of those cracks. You just get a great, even, smooth coverage. And when you're using a light color, your edges stay dark brown, which I like too. Okay, so just pounce your laser letter completely. With the pouncer, you don't have any drips, and then set that to the side to dry. Okay, now that we've let bless dry, you're going to need the wood tint that we've been using and a little brush. Dip right back into that watered down wood tint and just lightly wash over the word blessed. And here's where you can decide if you like it a darker color, keep it that way. If you want it a little bit lighter, just keep going back into your water. It's just basically whatever color you like best. So you are going to completely antique that letter or that word just as much as you want. And remember, our barnwood wreath is so distressed that you don't have to get coverage on every section of your letters. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry and we'll attach it to our wreath. Okay, so now that this is antiqued, I'm going to set that to the side. And while that is drying, we're going to work on our inserts for the wreath. Okay, the first one we're going to do is the heart, and this is the one that I keep in my wreath most of the time, unless it's a holiday. So this is what you're going to need. You're going to need the unfinished Woodco insert. You are going to need the chalk paint red, the chalk paint white. You're going to need that other little section of the Martha Stewart screen that you cut apart, the long skinny border. You are going to need a stencil brush, and you are also going to need, we don't need the wood tint right now, but you're going to need the black chalk paint. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do for our heart insert is we are going to base coat the heart with chalk paint red. Again, just a medium-sized flat brush and just base coat that entire heart. Now, I don't like to get on the edges, so I like to pull the paint off the edge, because that way you won't get any drips on the edge. And just kind of finish that shape of the heart for the curve. So paint that completely. You get great coverage with FolkArt chalk paint, and with the unfinished Woodco wood, it's already prepped. It's such high quality. So the heart is done. Now I'm going to set that aside, and I'm going to let that dry. So once the heart is dry, we're going to use the same technique that we did on our wreath. And this is the Martha Stewart silkscreen. This is just that long border pattern. So separate that. Sometimes tricky. You got to just peel that back. Separate that from the backer, and don't forget, save that, because you'll put it back on when it's clean, so you can reuse it. So position your silkscreen wherever you want. I like to start in the middle because I'm going to repeat this all the way down, completely covering my heart. So again, you're going to want a stencil brush using the black chalk paint. And remember, with the silk screens, you want a lot of paint because you're going to move it over that, unlike a stencil where you use almost very little paint. So see how you just put that on the screen and run it around on every single edge, filling in every section. Make sure while the paint is still wet, you pull that off, lift that, and pull that off, and look at that. You get a perfect silk screened pattern. Now what I am going to do is I'm going to repeat that, and all I'm going to do is I am going to line that edge up with the screen that was already done. I'm going to lightly press that down. I'm going to go right back in that paint. And again, the magic of these silk screens is you want to use a ton of paint. You want that to move around very, very good. Cover it completely, and then while it's still wet, pull that silk screen off, and you get all of that beautiful detail. So go on and finish your entire heart by repeating that, and then let that dry. Okay, once that is dry, I'm going to go back and paint my edges white. And what I've already done is painted these edges white just so that you can see the difference. And the reason I did the white after I did the red and the silk screen is that way you can cover up any areas that the black silk screen might have gone over onto the white section. So paint that white, let that dry completely, and then using a small flat brush, the same wood tint that you used on your wreath, I am going to wet my brush. Little bit of water, little bit of wood tint, get a really thin consistency, and I am just going to wash over every section of this painted shape. And here again, we mentioned when you were doing the wreath, add as much or as little of this wood tint as you like. If you don't want to add any and you like the bold white, don't antique it at all. If you want it to be even darker, add less water. Okay, so I am going to antique that. I'm going to let that dry. Once that is dry, you can see it darkened up all the areas. So I am just going to lightly take a piece of sandpaper. Again, you're using chalk paint, so chalk paint sands nicely. And with very little effort, I am going to sand over that stained, revealing a little bit of the white because I want a little bit more of that white to come through. But see how with very little effort, that wood tint softens up and creates a softer finish. And I'm going to do the same thing with the edges of the heart. See how it's revealing, one, the edge of the wood, but it's also bringing out the richness in the red. So again, just sand it as much as you like. There's not a right or a wrong formula. Okay, with the chalk paint, remember it's very dusty, so tap that, give it a brush to get all the sanding particles off, and then your first insert is complete. Okay, so now that you've completed your wreath and your first insert, we're going to do one more insert, because the greatest thing about the barnwood wreath is there's different interchangeable centers for every single holiday. So the next one I picked for me is the butterfly, because spring is almost here. So for this insert, let me tell you what you're going to need. You are going to need white chalk paint, black chalk paint, you're going to need the yellow chalk paint, and you are going to need the wood tint. You are also going to need, remember those two little pieces of the screen that you didn't use, you're going to need those, a flat brush and a stencil brush. So let me show you how to do that. Okay, so now we're going to paint the butterfly insert. First thing I'm going to use is yellow croquet chalk paint, a little tip, give it a little bit of shake just to get paint up there on your lid. That way it works as a perfect little palette. So using the chalk paint, I am just going to base coat both butterfly wings. Get all the way to the edge. I don't like to go over the edge because I like that dark brown when it's a laser cut shape from Unfinished Wood Co. So, and I picked this butterfly. When you guys go to unfinishedwoodco.com, there are so many different options. There's a bunny, there's a flower, there's sayings. You can do your last name, the monogram. So make sure you go on there and pick the shape that is best for you to put in the center of your wreath. But also order one for every season, because that's what's so unique about this, is you can change it out with every holiday. Okay, so using the chalk paint, you only need one coat. So my little butterfly wings are base coated yellow. Now I am going to switch brushes and using the chalk paint white, again I shook the bottle so that there's paint in the lid. I am just going to go around and do the circle. And look at the coverage. You get perfect coverage. Now don't forget, everything that we've done so far today has been distressed. So we are also going to distress these. So when you're applying your base coat, everything does not have to be perfect. You just want to make sure you get good coverage on all the wood areas. Getting that circle base coated. I'm just using a medium-sized flat brush, going around the edge. I kind of like to bring the butterfly's wings out a little bit. You can do that, or you can just make that circle go straight across. So paint that completely. All right, so that is painted, no drips on the edge. Now I'm going to set that to the side to dry. Okay, and now that that is dry, what I am going to do is I'm going to clean off my brush, and I am going to use just a little bit of black chalk paint, and I'm just going to follow the line of the butterfly's body, connecting the top to the bottom. Again, we're distressing, so that does not have to be perfect. Connecting those two, and I'm going to make sure that that body is solid black. Okay, then I'm also going to let that dry. Okay, so now that everything is base coated, again, we're going to use the Martha Stewart screen that we used before, removing the backer paper. That's always tricky. Pulling that off. And then this one, I just really want to get pattern on my wings. I don't care that they're exactly the same. So I am just going to start placing these elements on my butterfly. So remember, they're adhesive, so press that down using a stencil brush and the white chalk paint. And again, you want a lot. I'm going to put it, I'm not going to get those 4 elements on the side. I'm just going to get that center design. And you want to put a bunch of paint on there, and you want to move it around almost like you're buttering bread with a whole bunch of butter. Put that on there. Once it's covered, you just lift up the edge and you pull that back and you get that gorgeous element. So I'm going to, using these two screens, I'm going to completely cover up my wings and add designs wherever I want to. Then I'm going to let that dry. So now that I've done that, I added different designs, and again, they don't match, but that's okay. I just wanted to add pattern. So once that is on there, using that wood tint that we've been using for our project and a flat brush, once again, I'm going to dip my brush in water, get some water on my palette, a little bit of the wood stain, and like we said for every other shape, get the color that you want. If you wanted a darker brown, add more tint. If you wanted a lighter wash, just keep going back into the water. So I am going to wash over every section of this wood insert. I'm going to wash over the edge, because your edge will show when you insert that into your wreath. And then I'm going to wash over the wings. And see how that just distresses the different areas of the silkscreen. Okay, so once that's on there, I'm going to let that dry. And then you'll see that it is just darkened and distressed every section. So like I did on the heart, I'm going to take a piece of sandpaper, and you don't have to sand too much because again, the chalk paint, one of the characteristics is it sands so well. With very little effort, I'm just removing some of that wood stain. I'm removing some of it, revealing some of that brighter yellow. It's also bringing out a little bit more white on those silkscreen designs. I'm going to do a little bit on the edge of the black to show raw wood. I'm going to soften the white along the edge. I'm going to tap that off because the chalk paint does make a lot of powder when you're sanding. And now I've got an insert, the butterfly insert, that's ready to put into my wreath for spring. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put all of this together to see the finished project. Okay, so now that all your components are complete, your wreath, the two inserts, and your laser word, the first thing that we are going to do is flip that over, and I'm going to show you just a quick way to hang your wreath. So make sure you know top and bottom, kind of hold it when you're flipping it over. So this is my top. So just using a little piece of wire and a staple gun, I'm going to go in the middle of the top section. You don't want to go too high because it'll show, and you don't want to go too low. You want to go right there in the middle. And I am just simply going to put a staple on one end and give that wire just a little twist. Then I'm going to pull that tight, and I'm going to put a staple on the other end. I'm going to twist that through there and pull that tight. So that is all you need to hang this, whether it be on your door or your mantle. So then I'm going to flip that over, and I like to use hot glue gun, but you can use wood glue, you can use tacky glue, but I am just going to add 2 little dots of wood, of glue, onto a few different sections of my laser letter. And then I'm just going to position that exactly where I want it and press that down. Kind of pull off any of those little hot glue gun strings. If you've ever worked with hot glue, you know that that's what happens. And then you've got your completed wreath. Now that your wreath is complete and all of your inserts are painted, don't forget there's a little tab in the back. So take your insert, put that behind the tab, slide that underneath there, make sure it's straight, and then just press that into place. Now your wreath is ready to be hung anywhere you'd like. Hey everyone, thanks for crafting with us. If you liked this project today, please press the thumbs up button and also subscribe to our channel. There are links to all of the products that we used below, so make sure to check that out. And if you really liked us, ring the bell, and that way we'll be able to let you know when our next video is coming out. If you guys have any questions, comment below and we'll get back to you. See you next time. Ready? Will, you cannot hum.